Section 00 of Selected Works, Poems by Voltairine de Cleyre. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Hannah Dowell. Introduction from Selected Works, Poems by Voltairine de Cleyre. Nature has the habit of, now and then, producing a type of human being far in advance of the times. An ideal for us to emulate. A being devoid of sham, uncompromising, and to whom the truth is sacred. A being whose selfishness is so large that it takes in the whole human race, and treats self only as one of the great mass. A being keen to sense all forms of wrong, and powerful in denunciation of it. One who can reach into the future and draw it near. Such a being was Voltairine de Cleyre. What could be added to this splendid tribute by J. Fox to the memory of Voltairine de Cleyre? These admirable words express the sentiments of all the friends and comrades of that remarkable woman, whose whole life was dedicated to a dominant idea. Like many other women in public life, Voltairine de Cleyre was a voluminous letter-writer. Those letters, addressed to her comrades, friends, and admirers, would form her real biography. In them we trace her heroic struggles, her activity, her beliefs, her doubts, her mental changes, in short, her whole life, mirrored in a manner no biographer will ever be able to equal. To collect and publish this correspondence, as a part of Voltairine de Cleyre's works, is impossible. The task is too big for the present undertaking, but let us hope that we will find time and means to publish at least a part of this correspondence in the near future. The average American still holds to the belief that anarchism is a foreign poison, imported into the States from decadent Europe by criminal paranoiacs. Hence, the ridiculous attempt of our lawmakers to stamp out anarchy by passing a statute which forbids anarchists from other lands to enter the country. Those wise Solons are ignorant of the fact that anarchist theories and ideas were propounded in our Commonwealth ere Proudhon or Bacchian entered the arena of intellectual struggle and formulated their thesis of perfect freedom and economic independence in anarchy. Neither are they acquainted with the writings of Lindsay Spooner, Josiah Warren, Stephen Pearl Andrews, William B. Greene, or Benjamin Tucker, nor familiar with the propagandistic work of Albert R. Parsons, Dyer D. Lum, C. L. James, Moses Harman, Ross Wynne, and a host of other anarchists who sprang from the native stock and soil. To call their attention to these facts is quite as futile as to point out that the tocsin of revolt resounds in the writings of Emerson, Thoreau, Hawthorne, Whitman, Garrison, Wendell Phillips, and other seers of America. Just as futile as to prove to them that the pioneers in the movement for women's emancipation in America were permeated with the anarchist thoughts and feelings. Hardened by a fierce struggle and strengthened by a vicious persecution, those brave champions of sex freedom defied the respectable mob by proclaiming their independence from prevailing cant and hypocrisy. They inaugurated the tremendous sex revolt among the American women, a purely native movement which is yet to find its historian. Voltairine de Cleyre belongs to this gallant array of rebels who swore allegiance to the cause of universal liberty, thus forfeiting the respect of all honourable citizens, and bringing upon their heads the persecution of the ruling class. In the real history of the struggle for human emancipation, her name will be found among the foremost of her time. Born shortly after the close of the Civil War, she witnessed, during her life, the most momentous transformation of the nation. She saw the change from an agricultural community into an industrial empire, the tremendous development of capital in this country, with the accompanying misery and degradation of labour. Her life path was sketched ere she reached the age of womanhood. She had to become a rebel. To stand outside of the struggle would have meant intellectual death. She chose the only way. Voltairine de Cleyre was born on November 17, 1866, in the town of Leslie, Michigan. She died on June 6, 1912, in Chicago. She came from French-American stock on her mother's side of Puritan descent. Her father, Auguste de Cleyre, was a native of western Flanders, but his family was of French origin. He emigrated to America in 1854. Being a free thinker and a great admirer of Voltaire, he insisted on the birthday of the child that the new member of the family should be called Voltairine. Though born in Leslie, the earliest recollections of Voltairine were in the small town of St. John's in Clinton County. Her parents having removed to that place a year after her birth, Voltairine did not have a happy childhood. Her earliest life was embittered by want of the common necessities, which her parents, hard as they tried, could not provide. A vein of sadness can be traced in her earliest poems, the songs of a child of talent and great fantasy. A deep sorrow fell into her heart at the age of 4, when the teacher of the primary school refused to admit her because she was too young. But she soon succeeded in forcing her entrance into the temple of knowledge. An earnest student, she was graduated from the grammar school at the age of 12. Strength of mind does not seem to have been a characteristic of Auguste Cleyre, for he recanted his libertarian ideas, returned to the fold of the church, and became obsessed with the idea that the highest vocation for a woman was the life of a nun. He determined to put the child into a convent. Thus began the great tragedy of Voltairine's early life. Her beloved mother, a member of the Presbyterian Church, opposed this idea with all her strength, but in vain. The will of the lord of the household prevailed, and the child was sent to the convent of Our Lady of Lake Huron at Sarnia, in the province of Ontario, Canada. Here she experienced 4 years of terrible ordeal. Only after much repression, insubordination, and atonement, she forced her way back into the living world. In the sketch The Making of an Anarchist, she tells us of the strain she underwent in that living tomb. How I pity myself now when I remember it. Poor lonesome little soul, battling solitary in the murk of religious superstition, unable to believe, and yet in hourly fear of damnation, hot, savage, and eternal, if I do not instantly confess and profess. How well I recall the bitter energy with which I repelled my teacher's enjoinder, when I told her I did not wish to apologize for an adjudged fault, as I could not see that I had been wrong, and would not feel my words. "It is not necessary," said she, "that we should feel what we say, but it is always necessary that we obey our superiors." "I will not lie," I answered hotly, and at the same time trembled lest my disobedience had finally consigned me to torment. I struggled my way out at last, and was a free thinker when I left the institution 3 years later, though I had never seen a book, or heard a word, to help me in my loneliness. It had been like the valley of the shadow of death, and there are white scars on my soul yet, where ignorance and superstition burnt me with their hellfire in those stifling days. Am I blasphemous? It is their word, not mine. Beside that battle of my young days, all others have been easy, for whatever was without, within my own will was supreme. It has owed no allegiance, and never shall. It has moved steadily in one direction, the knowledge and assertion of its own liberty, with all the responsibility falling thereon. During her stay at the convent, there was little communication between her and her parents. In a letter from Mrs. Eliza de Cleyre, the mother of Voltairine, we are informed that she decided to run away from the convent after she had been there a few weeks. She escaped before breakfast and crossed the river to Port Huron, but, as she had no money, she started to walk home. After covering 17 miles, she realized that she never could do it, so she turned around and walked back, and entering the house of an acquaintance in Port Huron, asked for something to eat. They sent for her father, who afterwards took her back to the convent. What penance they inflicted she never told, but at 16 her health was so bad that the convent authorities let her come home for a vacation, telling her, however, that she would find her every movement watched, and that everything she said would be reported to them. The result was that she started at every sound, her hands shaking and her face as pale as death. She was about 5 weeks from graduating at that time. When her vacation was over, she went back and finished her studies, and then she started for home again. But this time she had money enough for her fare, and she got home to stay, never to go back to the place that had been a prison to her. She had seen enough of the convent to decide for herself that she could not be a nun. The child who had sung, "There's a love supreme in the great hereafter, the buds of earth are bloom in heaven, the smiles of the world are ripples of laughter when back to its Aidenn the soul is given. And the tears of the world, though long in flowing, water the fields of the by and by, they fall as dews on the sweet grass growing, when the fountains of sorrow and grief run dry. Though clouds hang over the furrows now sowing, there's a harvest sun-wreath in the after sky. No love is wasted, no heart beats vainly, there's a vast perfection beyond the grave. Up the bays of heaven the stars shine plainly, the stars lying dim on the brow of the wave. And the lights of our loves, though they flicker and wane, they shall shine all undimmed in the ether nave. For the altars of God are lit with souls, fanned to flaming with love where the star wind rolls. Returned from the convent, a strong-minded free-thinker, she was received with open arms by her mother, almost as one returned from the grave. With the exception of the education derived from books, she knew no more than a child, having almost no knowledge of practical things. Already in the convent, she had succeeded in impressing her strong personality upon her surroundings. Her teachers could not break her. They were therefore forced to respect her. In a polemic with the editor of the Catholic Buffalo Union and Times a few years ago, Voltairine wrote, "If you think that I, as your opponent, deserve the benefit of truth, but as a stranger you doubt my veracity, I respectfully request you to submit this letter to Sister Mary Medard, my former teacher, now superioress at Windsor, or to my reverend friend, Father Siegfried, Overbrook Seminary, Overbrook, Pa, who will tell you whether, in their opinion, my disposition to tell the truth may be trusted." Reaction from the repression and the cruel discipline of the Catholic Church helped to develop Voltairine's inherent tendency towards free thought. The five-told murder of the Labour leaders in Chicago in 1887 shocked her mind so deeply that from that moment dates her development towards anarchism. When in 1886 the bomb fell on Haymarket Square and the anarchists were arrested, Voltairine de Cleyre, who at that time was a free-thought lecturer, shouted, "They ought to be hanged!" They were hanged, and now her body rests in Waldheim Cemetery, near the grave of those martyrs. Speaking at a memorial meeting in the honour of those comrades in 1901, she said, "For that ignorant, outrageous, bloodthirsty sentence, I shall never forgive myself, though I know the dead men would have forgiven me, though I know those who loved them forgive me. But my own voice, as it sounded that night, will sound so in my ears till I die. A bitter reproach and a shame. I have only one word of exhortation for myself and the millions of others who did as I did that night: ignorance." She did not remain long in ignorance. In The Making of an Anarchist, she describes why she became a convert to the idea, and why she entered the movement. "Till then," she writes, "I believed in the essential justice of the American law and trial by jury. After that I never could. The infamy of that trial has passed into history, and the question it awakened as to the possibility of justice under the law has passed into a clamorous crying across the world." At the age of 19, Voltairine had consecrated herself to the service of humanity. In her poem The Burial of My Past Self, she thus bids farewell to her youthful life: "And now, humanity, I turn to you. I consecrate my service to the world. Perish the old love, welcome to the new, broad as the space isles where the stars are whirled." Yet the pure and simple free-thought agitation in this narrow circle could not suffice her. The spirit of rebellion, the spirit of anarchy, took hold of her soul. The idea of universal rebellion saved her. Otherwise she might have stagnated, like so many of her contemporaries, suffocated in the narrow surroundings of their intellectual life. A lecture of Clarence Darrow, which she heard in 1887, led her to the study of socialism, and then there was for her but one step to anarchism. Dyer D. Lum, the fellow worker of the Chicago martyrs, had undoubtedly the greatest influence in shaping her development. He was her teacher, her confidant, and comrade. His death in 1893 was a terrible blow to Voltairine. Voltairine spent the greater part of her life in Philadelphia. Here, among congenial friends, and later among the Jewish emigrants, she did her best work. In 1897 she went on a lecture tour to England and Scotland, and in 1902, after an insane youth had tried to take her life, she went for a short trip to Norway to recuperate from her wounds. Hers was a life of bitter economic struggle and an unceasing fight with physical weakness, partly resulting from this very economic struggle. One wonders how, under such circumstances, she could have produced such an amount of work. Her poems, sketches, propagandistic articles, and essays may be found in the Open Court, 20th Century Magazine of Poetry, Truth, Lucifer, Boston Investigator, Rights of Labour, Truth Seeker, Liberty, Chicago Liberal, Free Society, Mother Earth, and in the Independent. She translated Jean Grave's Moribund Society and Anarchy from the French, and left an unfinished translation of Louise Michel's work on the Paris Commune. In Mother Earth appeared her translations from the Jewish of Libin and Petters. In collaboration with Dyer de Lum, she wrote a novel on social questions, which has unfortunately remained unfinished. Voltairine de Cleyre's views on the sex question, on agnosticism and free thought, on individualism and communism, and on non-resistance and direct action, underwent many changes. In the year 1902 she wrote, "The spread of Tolstoy's War and Peace, and the slavery of our times, and the growth of the numerous Tolstoy clubs, having for their purpose the dissemination of the literature of non-resistance, is an evidence that many receive the idea that it is easier to conquer war with peace. I am one of these. I can see no end of retaliation, unless someone ceases to retaliate." She adds, however, "But let no one mistake this for servile submission or meek abnegation. My right shall be asserted, no matter what cost to me, and none shall trench upon it without my protest." But, as she used to quote her comrade Dyer de Lum, events proved to be the true schoolmasters. The last years of her life were filled with the spirit of direct action, and especially with the social importance of the Mexican Revolution. The splendid propaganda work of Wilhelmina C. Owen in behalf of this tremendous upheaval inspired her to great effort. She, too, had found out by experience that only action counts, that only a direct participation in the struggle makes life worth while. Voltairine de Cleyre was one of the most remarkable personalities of our time. She was born iconoclast. Her spirit was too free, her taste too refined to accept any idea that has the slightest degree of limitation. A great sadness, a knowledge that there is a universal pain, filled her heart. Through her own suffering and through the suffering of others, she reached the highest exaltation of mind. She was conscious of all the vanities of life. In the service of the poor and oppressed she found her life mission. In an exquisite tribute to her memory, Leonard de Abbot calls Voltairine de Cleyre a priestess of pity and of vengeance, whose voice has a vibrant quality that is unique in literature. We are convinced that her writings will live as long as humanity exists. Hippolyte Havel. End of introduction. Recording by Hannah Dowell.